Hi there friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. When clone Captain Hauser decides to take the side of the Twi'lek resistance against his own empire, it potentially marks the beginning of a wider clone rebellion against their Imperial rulers. This is the thing that Emperor Palpatine fears more than anything else, even more than he fears the surviving Jedi, like Yoda and Obi-Wan Kenobi. So what can Emperor Palpatine do to make sure that Captain Hauser's little rebellion remains a footnote in the history books instead of a massive chapter? That's what we'll be looking at today. So the immediate issue now is you have this mini clone rebellion on Ryloth. Captain Hauser and dozens of clones who defied the orders of Crosshair need to be dealt with. In my opinion, the best option here is just to make them all disappear. No public trial, no execution or anything like that, because let's be honest, the clones are not going to be afraid of some punitive display of what happens to treasonous clones. If anything, it will rile up the clones who are already dissatisfied with how the Empire treats them. So disappear Hauser and all the other clones that went along with them and blame it all on the Twi'leks. Specifically Cham Syndulla and his resistance fighters, and also probably get rid of all of the other clones who were involved in the situation and were there to witness the incident. Leave no breadcrumbs behind. Use this incident to really explain why there needs to be a complete military occupation of Ryloth and why the Twi'leks are savages. I mean, make Captain Hauser's death really brutal. Show images of Twi'leks on speeders dragging his corpse along the back with a rope. Maybe show them feeding him to a blurg. Most clones probably liked Captain Hauser, so turn him into a martyr for your brutal oppression of the Twi'leks. The thing is, when Captain Hauser made his appeal to the clones to rebel, the majority did not. A large minority did, but ultimately, peace was restored on the planet. The Galactic Empire might have to go through this process on multiple worlds and hope that the majority of the clones won't side with the Wookiees or the Yondoranians or Mon Cala. This situation, however, would be very unacceptable for Emperor Palpatine, even if the majority of clones will be obedient because of their training and genetic predispositions. He's still not going to like the idea of miniature rebellions happening all across the galaxy. Now, in the beginning of the Bad Batch series, when Clone Force 99 fails their mission to take down Saw Gerrera, Tarkin has Crosshair removed from the group and examined by a Kaminoan scientist. While the rest of the Clone Force 99's inhibitor chips have failed due to the genetic mutations that the clones underwent, Crosshair's chip seems a bit more intact, and he ends up even filing a report against his teammates because they failed to carry out Order 66, which is completely against the Broforce Code of Manliness. Tarkin has the Kaminoan scientist enhance the power of the inhibitor chip by zapping it with some kind of energy. The result is terrifying and makes Crosshair extremely obedient to the orders of the Empire. Even though Order 66 is no longer a thing, Crosshair continues to pursue any individual who has disobeyed Order 66. This shows us that perhaps the inhibitor chips are not just tied to Order 66, but to general obedience. Now, we don't know why Captain Hauser and those clones who chose his side were able to act the way they did, even though they clearly have inhibitor chips like everyone else. But if the Empire were somehow able to mass reproduce the results that they created with Crosshair, it could help Palpatine reassert his control over all of the clones. The real issue is the cost of such a programming, and how would they do it? Would they just shut off like an EMP electric wave that fries everyone's inhibitor chips and increases their potency? We just don't know how that would work. Also, if the clones detect that the military is shocking their brains in order to create more obedience, that could further damage the relationship between the clones and the Empire. So the controlled chip enhancement route is perhaps a little bit too dangerous and risky, in my opinion. Also, it wouldn't be worth it at the end of the day because the clone troopers are far too expensive to produce, and they also age rapidly, which means their effectiveness drastically decreases after they hit the age of 20, which is actually 40 for them. Project War Mantle, championed by Vice Admiral Rampart, is really the future of the Galactic Empire's armed forces. Rampart envisions a massive force of loyal and brave enlisted men and women fighting for the Empire all across the galaxy. He believes that those who volunteer for service have much more loyalty than those who are that-bred clones. I beg to differ. I think Rampart is a little bit naive and idealistic about why people join the Empire. It's not just because they believe in the Empire, it's for a variety of different reasons. The majority of Imperial forces are probably made up of regular folks looking for a job or a way off of their planet, or just a better life. Also, the Empire would eventually have to conscript fighters because of a shortage in manpower. But ultimately, the best way to stop a clone rebellion is by diluting and splitting up the clones, putting them into training positions for the new civilian army, and spreading them out in combat units and placing them in mixed units. This is a common tactic used actually by corporations to prevent workers from organizing and protesting against work conditions. And from what we can tell in Star Wars Legends, this is most likely how the clones were phased out, just very gradually and peacefully. Rebellious activity is oftentimes a sign of real issues and underlying problems, but it can also occur in a vacuum created by boredom. The reality is, with the defeat of the Separatist Alliance, there is no massive threat against the Empire anymore. The Grand Army of the Republic was in every way a galactic military force, a massive conventional military designed to take on other massive conventional militaries. Without an enemy to occupy them, the clones will just become restless, and they might even be unhappy when forced to do other tasks like peacekeeping or garrison duty. What the clones really need is a genuine and massive threat. So Emperor Palpatine might have to do what he does best and engineer an enemy that they must take on, something like the Rebel Alliance or the Yuuzhan Vong. This would be an epic matchup. But unfortunately for Palpatine, the first decade or so of Imperial rule is relatively peaceful. There are no major threats at the galactic level. And so it'll be interesting to see if Palpatine can create enough conflict to occupy the clones until they are eventually phased out. The Commission for the Preservation of the New Order was one of the most powerful tools in Palpatine's arsenal. The best way to describe this organization would be a political party, but it was actually far more than that. It was an ideological populist movement that had cult-like tendencies. The individuals who joined were rabidly loyal to Palpatine and the Empire, and their main goal was to police the views and actions of their fellow citizens. Copnor would work closely with the military and state security apparatuses, even though they were technically a civilian organization. Copnor also had massive amounts of funding, which it would redirect into propaganda efforts ranging from posters, political talk shows, to events and even demonstrations. And so while most Imperial dissenters feared the Stormtroopers and the ISB, the reality was the first line of defense of the Empire came from the citizens of Copnor. Copnor would be responsible for marginalizing aliens and other degenerate non-human species. They could also, in theory, easily be turned against the clone troopers. Whichever direction Palpatine wanted public opinion to go, Copnor would deliver it through sheer force of will. If Palpatine can turn the people against the clones, it would be much harder for individuals like clone Captain Hauser to find sympathy amongst his fellow troops. It would be a lot easier for the clones to oppress civilians that were actively fighting and protesting against them. I think Palpatine shouldn't be panicking at this moment yet, but he should be putting in contingency plans in case this rebellion thing becomes a trend and starts engulfing the entire galaxy. I personally think that this kind of story arc will make Bad Batch a much more interesting show. I mean, I think there's going to be a second season, right? I should know these kind of things. But if there is a larger arc, I hope this is what we get to see. A civil war of some kind between the good clones and the clones who will just be obedient. Well, let me know in the comment section below what you think about all this. Also, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, thanks for joining us today. If you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.